Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me.
Something I've been doing again lately is to watch several documentaries. One that caught my eye was the 4-part Netflix documentary series Pepsi, Where's My Jet? This series tells the story of a then American 20-year-old called John Leonard and his lawsuit against Pepsi Cola. The lawsuit centres around a promotional campaign launched by Pepsi in 1995. It was really based around one real promotional item called Pepsi Points. The advertising promotional campaign premise was really simple. Depending on the differing amounts of Pepsi that you had bought, you would get a certain amount of Pepsi points. These points could then be redeemed against items that were available in the accompanying catalogue. So, for example, if you had 10 Pepsi points, you could get a t-shirt. And this was all, of course, Pepsi merchandise in this catalogue, so it was a Pepsi t-shirt. For 25 points, you could get a Pepsi cap. And for 50 points, you could get a Pepsi jacket. Other items, of course, available again within that accompanying catalogue. However, it wasn't anything in the catalogue that caught John Leonard's eye. It was indeed the television advert that was part of this promotional campaign. More in fact, the end of the advert, because at the end it showed a kid really flying and landing a Harrier jump jet, jumping out, and then that Harrier jump jet being advertised as being available for 7 million of these so-called Pepsi points. That is what caught John Leonard's attention, his heart and desire. That is what he really wanted, and he really set his heart on achieving the 7 million Pepsi points and getting this Harrier jump jet. He would turn to a friend, mentor and businessman called Todd Huffman, who would give him some encouragement, and John would eventually make a business plan up where he, John and I believe a couple other investors would basically rent some storage space, hire a few workers who would take the points off the labels, and they would gather the 7 million Pepsi points needed that way. To be honest, I don't know why, but that setup of hiring the storage areas, hiring some workers to to cut the Pepsi points off the labels, and I'm not sure exactly how it worked for cans, but certainly for me it very much sounded, and I don't know why it jumped into my mind, but it certainly sounded like Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film, the one with Gene Wilder, because she got her father, instead of, I believe I checked out a little bit earlier, instead of the factory shelling peanuts, they had the whole staff sitting unwrapping Wonka bars, looking for that golden ticket, feverishly looking for it, desperately looking for it, which of course was eventually found. So I don't know why that kind of thought jumped into my head of it sounded really similar to that. But obviously, again, John Leonard was very tenacious about this. He really wanted that Harrier jet. And so that didn't happen though. That hiring of storage areas and hiring of workers didn't happen, because actually, basically cut a bit of a story short than it is, he saw some promotional material that you could actually buy these Pepsi points, I believe it was 10 cents a piece. And so he went back to his friend, mentor Todd Huffman, who we don't really get an emphasis on, and I'm sure I could probably do the research, but we don't really get to hear how successful and what kind of businesses Todd Huffman does. But he must be fairly successful because they work out that instead of hiring the storage areas, hiring the workers, and doing all that work and taking all that time to gather the points, this way of buying the Pepsi points for 10 cents a piece is far more easier for them to do. And so Todd Huffman cuts a check for $782,000, somewhere in that region anyway. And John would go with a female lawyer to some postal worker, I want to say Detroit, but certainly somewhere, and deposit that check to send to Pepsi. Now this is where the lawsuit comes in, because all John got back was a letter thanking him for his interest, saying, haha, thanks for your interest in this, and a few vouchers for money off Pepsi, which John Leonard, I will say, was and still is a huge fan of. To this day, he has drunk Pepsi all his life. His family is a Pepsi family, as sometimes people say with these kind of brands, of being a Heinz family or a Pepsi family. In this story, he drinks and still drinks Pepsi. That's what he got. So he and Todd Hoffman and a lawyer ended up launching this lawsuit against Pepsi Cola, basically asking Pepsi, as in the title of this program, Pepsi, where's my check? One thing I will throw in here is that John actually did a little bit of research and did investigate with some authorities whether he or any civilian could own a Harrier jump jet, because these are jets that are, I believe still to this day, there's a certain kind of variety of them that are still used in the United States military, and I know militaries around the world use similar types of jets to Harrier jet. I know there's different kinds. I'm not an expert on aircraft by any means, but he checked with some authority, some aviation authority, I believe it was, and they said yes, as long as it didn't have any weaponry, doesn't have any particular sensitive piece of technology, he could easily get a Harrier jump jet, which is great news for him, and he went ahead with the lawsuit. Later on, the Pentagon, in a spokesman, you see it very specifically in the documentary series. I'm not going to go through all 4 parts, but you see later on a spokesman for the Pentagon saying, in fact, no, a civilian can't own the a Harrier jet. Obviously, this is 1995-96, and the lawsuit actually lasts until through 1999. And at that time, obviously, this was before 9/11, so I think due to the publicity that this lawsuit gathered, I think the Pentagon was a little bit nervous of civilians having such planes, even in those times, in the mid to late 90s. So I think that's why they turned around and said, oh, actually, no, as a civilian can't get a Harrier jump jet, which obviously basically didn't really help John Leonard's case in the end. One of the questions asked right the way throughout this documentary series is whether John Leonard, or anyone else actually, should or could really believe that Pepsi was offering a Harrier jump jet. Now, apparently, according to this documentary, in Canada, they were showing the same advert, the same promotional campaign was going on with Pepsi points, but the end of the advert said basically, oh, by the way, we're kidding about the jet. Where the advert in the United States, where John Leonard lives and saw this advert, it was on national television, it said no such disclaimer, which again another reason why he checked with authorities and then went ahead, definitely went ahead with the lawsuit. And so the questions asked is whether, again, whether he or anyone else in particular, or in the general public, should believe that, or have the right to believe that Pepsi would offer such a prize in such a promotional campaign. And I know I'm not a legal expert, I've said this multiple times just so people are aware, and I think it's obvious I'm not a legal expert, but certainly I do know the laws, certainly in the UK, and I believe in America as well, they've been changing again about about different promotional campaigns and advertisement aimed at kids, and advertisements to do with certain so-called junk foods. So fast food chains, cola drinks like Pepsi or Coke, just various different sugar drinks. Those laws have definitely changed within the last few years. But I don't think, to be honest, John Leonard is out of left field, or any other analogy you could think of, to not really truly believe that a company like Pepsi could actually offer such a prize as a Harrier jet. I mean, I'm in my late 30s. I remember I grew up in the 90s, going to school then. Honestly, even my experience, I don't think it is too much to think of a company like Pepsi offering a jump jet, because in those days, again, laws have changed in recent years, but a lot of these brands, going through different sports, game shows, even in the UK, in different places, they were offering some weird and wonderful prizes at that time for various different competitions, from cars. I know in America you get some things like RVs, caravans, boats, houses. Even some places offered houses. The wrestling competition around the same time as this that gave away a house. Big WWE, the big wrestling company, just for example, they gave away a house to a viewer for the start of their monthly pay-per-views. I think this was around about the same time. And a brand like Pepsi is a worldwide brand. Everybody knows that brand. And so customer attention is not hugely a problem, but I think to try and keep people speaking about a brand like that, a lot of advertising people, they want to do something that is unusual, that's different, that gets people talking. It's got what they call in some places a kind of hook to it. A hook is like in music. A hook is that rhythm or beat that people will remember. It's a bit of an earworm. But in advertising, it's that a lot of people try it now. They call it viral videos. That's what it's called nowadays. A viral video. A lot of people, that's the thing that's, I think it's been unfortunate, because a lot of advertising agencies or products or brands, they make a video and they call it a viral video, but that's not what works. That's not how it works. That's not how it goes. A video can be made, it could be funny, it could capture people's attention, but what I would call a true viral video is a video that takes on a life of its own and gets shared around social media by millions of people at times, and it becomes really popular on its own. You can't just make a video and say, well, let's just make a viral video. A true viral video would be something that is funny, shocking, whatever it is, entertaining, just something that captures people's attention. And I think that's what sometimes, especially in the 90s, because I've listened to Business Wars podcast. I don't know whether it's still up, but hopefully it is. I do need to see whether there's more episodes of that. But in the 90s, it talks about, and I remember this well, the cola wars between Pepsi and Coca-Cola. They were in a much heralded, very serious brand war at the time, through the 1990s, with using different celebrities, using different advertising campaigns. It was basically like a lot of similar brands that are selling in a similar space. What are you? Are you a Pepsi person, or are you a Coca-Cola person? What side are you on, kind of thing. And so they want to get things that'll get people speaking about their brand. So I honestly don't think it's out of the realms of possibility that Coca-Cola, or even Pepsi in this case, would do something like offer a Harrier jump jet. The advertising campaign to that, there is a towing of the line, of the company line, in this documentary by the people representing Pepsi. They are all just, no, we're all kidding, we're all joking, we are not serious. Harrier jump jet, what are you, stupid? There's that whole line of people with it. I think they're still working for Pepsi. I think they're towing the line of, nah, we're only kidding, we're only joking, we're never intended to be serious, which unfortunately in 1999, basically kind of that in the Pentagon kind of sinks John Leonard's case. But, and I know that might be sound like I'm jumping ahead, but they're all towing that line and saying that basically it was a joke, it was a funny bit to add to the end of the commercial. John Leonard obviously disagrees with that, and so does Todd Huffman and so forth. One guy that was part of the creative process of this documentary, not the documentary, the advertising campaign, is a gentleman, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Michael Patti, Patti, I believe his name. What he says is, and to be honest, the way that he speaks, he seems to be fairly open and honest, so I've not really reason to disbelieve him. Like, just from what he says, it's very simple to understand that this would happen. He states that originally the campaign would be 70 million Pepsi points for that jump jet. And again, Canada, they had the disclaimer, not available, not like we're only joking, but in America they didn't have it for whatever reason. That's never really explored completely. It's mentioned, but it's not really explored why and what the differences are. Maybe that's to do with Canadian law. Maybe I missed that, but initially it was like 70 million Pepsi points. They thought, right, well, it's obviously a joke there, and it is obviously, even if people take it seriously, 70 million Pepsi points is far out of the reach of most people, so nobody's going to get anywhere near that during the time the promotion will run. They do increase it as the lawsuit goes on to 700 million Pepsi points or something like that. Obviously trying to put it out of people's reach, but again the lawsuit's already ongoing at that point. And Michael Patti says that was kind of said 70 million originally, but one of the higher ups than him told them when they were editing the advert to make it 7 million Pepsi points because it reads easier. It's easier to understand. Obviously not understanding that somebody would, like John Leonard and Todd Huffman, actually think, well, actually we can have this Pepsi Harrier jet that's been offered. We want to go for it. I'll talk about it in a second, but I think they got lucky on a little bit of this. But certainly reducing that number to 7 million just so because it's easier to read was a bit of the danger point, where this part of at least where this trouble came in with this lawsuit that Pepsi Cola faced. I will also quickly say there is a gentleman involved also in this documentary called Michael Avenatti. He's a former lawyer, and I meant to check whether there was any update, but he is a former lawyer now who was accused, at least allegedly, of trying to at least extort $25 million from Nike. The shoe and clothing brand. At the time that he's interviewed for the series, he's under house arrest. He does meet up with John Leonard. They do seem to be still friends. They travelled around a little bit together, doing various interviews and stuff like that, publicity, and a couple of different items that you see through the series. They're on the road for a while together, so they've become friends. I honestly don't like that Michael Avenatti does, just my opinion, simply my opinion, my own expressing my opinion here. He does seem a bit of a dodgy character to me. He does seem one of these it's sad because he seems to have gone off the rails and done potentially, allegedly, different things, and acted in a very bad way, like trying to extort this money, and he's been disbarred, I believe. But he does seem to be generally have some skill and some expertise and some knowledge about the law, and he could have been genuinely, I think, quite successful, or decently successful, but unfortunately, he does seem to me just to be one of those lawyers, one of those publicists. There's been a few in the UK that would jump aboard some type of cause or lawsuit to try and further his own personal and professional life, for his own reasons, his own personal reasons, his own kind of greedy reasons. To be honest, I think he kind of acts and jumps aboard this for purely personal reasons. He doesn't believe that they're going to win. He thinks that basically they've not much chance of winning, but he thinks he could move on to bigger and better stuff. And he doesn't. It seems to me anyway. Again, this is only me expressing my own personal opinion. I don't think he really cares about the case too much. He just sees this as an opportunity to get his name out there and to perhaps get bigger and better cases. I want to wrap this video up. Oh, this is just like I said a couple of minutes ago. John Leonard and Todd Hoffman don't end up winning the case. The case ends up getting dismissed in 1999 by the judge called Kim. I think she's called Kimba Wood. It's an unfortunate, again, I think partially due to the Pentagon saying the civilian can't really own a jet, which I think is a large part of it, the illegality of it, and I think also really the fact that Pepsi continually says, "Oh, we're only joking. It wasn't really offered. We weren't really offering a jet. It wasn't in the catalogue." I think those two reasons, I think, are the main reasons why eventually John Leonard and Todd Hoffman eventually lose their lawsuit in 1999 against Pepsi Cola. I will say, I think that, well, I don't want to get into it because I really want to re-watch that bit, but the bit about the Philippines, I think magic number advertising campaign that Pepsi did there, that is a bit horrible, disgusting situation where they basically printed out, it was a magic number thing where you would get numbers printed on the caps of Pepsi bottles and cans, I believe, and it was like a lottery thing, and they print out they print out quite a few of the actual winning number, 439 I believe it is. That whole bit is ridiculous and utterly just how that was handled. Even if you're on Pepsi's side on this documentary and this main story of obviously Pepsi are not really giving away a Harrier jet, even if you think, oh yeah, well it's obvious Pepsi are joking with this, I think you've got to look seriously at how Pepsi handled that situation. Also, I think again, as we wrap this video up, I think that Pepsi are really quite lucky that, and I think a lot of brands during the years have been very, very lucky that this kind of lawsuit hasn't been brought by someone who has tons and tons of money, a billionaire. Again, Todd Hoffman seems to be a fairly successful businessman, and has done fairly well for himself. And by the way, I'm glad to see that he is still healthy, because that's one of the concerns while they're making this documentary. He needs urgent surgery, which I'm glad to hear at the end of the documentary apparently went well, and he's doing well health-wise. But I think Pepsi and these kind of brands are really, really lucky that this isn't picked up and brought forward by some type of billionaire or somebody with a lot of power and money behind them. Because, yeah, okay, some people will say, well, if they're a billionaire, they could probably pay for a similar aircraft for if it was them that really wanted it, like John Leonard did, or whether it was one of their children. But there was in this situation really set their heart on them. In some of these cases, especially if it's the person themselves, that's the billionaire that really wants the one from Pepsi, it's lucky that Pepsi really don't have that kind of person going after them. because one thing that the major corporations do, and I'm not accusing Pepsi of doing this, it is known that big conglomerate, big tobacco and big manufacturers will do in some of these lawsuits. They'll drag it out, and it's proven in various different court cases over many decades. They will drag these things out and drag these things out, so the person who's normally a kind of basically working class person has to spend a lot of time and a lot of money that they can't afford to try and fight this, and eventually just have to throw their arms up in the air, throw the towel in, use whatever saying you want, but they eventually have to go, yeah, okay, there's no way I can afford to fight this. Which I think, again, John Leonard is a little bit lucky. He has Todd Hoffman's utter support during this whole process, even though there's things that Todd doesn't, I think, quite agree with. It's never really said, but there are obviously things like Michael Avenatti and just various different processes they have to go through. I don't think Todd really is enamoured with, but I think some of these companies, conglomerates, are extremely lucky that they haven't faced somebody. Maybe they have, but there's other cases. Maybe somebody would say they have, but they're really lucky, Pepsi, in this situation, that isn't somebody that really goes after them and has the power and money to go after them. I think it is a bit of a shame for John that he doesn't win this Harrier jump jet. He has gone on to be a fairly successful career. I think he's some kind of country tour guide thing. He seems very happy in what he's doing. So it's great that, I think that I think you've got to admire the tenacity of John Leonard. Certainly, you've got to admire what he did. He went through this only 21 odd years old. By the time this lawsuit really gets going, that he sticks with it for a few years. It's not just one of those, oh, well, I want that, and then 5 minutes later, then maybe not, I don't want it. I think it's great to see John actually keeps pushing for it and fights it all the way to the courts, and goes ahead with the case. So it's a good documentary. It's a good one if you want it. I will also recommend another one. I was going to mention it earlier on in this video, but McMillions, if you haven't watched that, that's actually a really good one if you want another documentary involving a major brand like McDonald's, because that's another reason why I didn't really think that it was too far out of left field for Pepsi to offer a Harrier jet, because at the time, the same time between 1989 and 2001, McDonald's, although it wasn't legitimately won, they were doing the Monopoly game in the United States, including several $1 million winners. That is a good documentary if you're into criminal conspiracies, FBI investigations, undercover work, major corruption. It's really a good documentary as well if you want to check that out.